And obviously, we're seeing in Australia. Is this what I've seen? Jessica, I think I'm of all the guests, I am the most envious of you. Uh,
Oh,
because of your view right now. Svetka is in Canada right now doing all this. It's cold everywhere. Brooke was, yeah, she was also in a warm place. But like it looks like the aesthetics of this is perfect. By all means, also what I forgot, land acknowledgement. Obviously, where are you right now?
sure. Hello, Yama. So I am in Newcastle, New South Wales, on a Awabakal country. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and future. I'm a Nyempa Wangaiban woman, which is central New South Wales.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry to the previous speakers, to Ariadne as well for now bringing that land acknowledgement up. I know for especially in Australia that it's a thing, and that's something that we should always do, like all around the world. But really, yeah, thank you so much for acknowledging that. What was I talking about? Yes, yeah, Firestick Alliance. You are a board member, and I think either in 747 is flying over you, or so luckily it's not my microphone that's doing that. Yeah, from your perspective, personally as well as professionally, whatever, however you want to start. How did you think about the question? Where is indigenous knowledge right now? Any thoughts that immediately surfaced?
If you had have asked me about 5 years ago, I would have had a very different answer to what I'm going to give you now. But I feel like Indigenous knowledge is in the stage of revival. So I guess in that essence...
But pardon me for interrupting. What was your thought 5 years ago then?
My thoughts 5 years ago was, where is my culture? Where is, how can we embed this? And, where's the respect and reciprocity for shared knowledge systems?
Thank you. Sorry for interrupting. Go ahead.
But definitely, I feel, particularly in the stage of where the Firestick Alliance is in a state of revival and embedding cultural knowledge.
Okay. In your experience, when you go into a conversation about indigenous knowledge, do you, for example, with what's the difference between and that having a conversation with indigenous peoples and non-indigenous peoples? What's the difference that you're experiencing?
Yeah. So I'm experiencing from MOB, so from Indigenous peoples, their essence of revival. I'm experiencing they're being supported to revive their knowledge within country and practice that knowledge. So cultural fire particularly brings out a sense of knowing, being, and participating, practicing your cultural knowledge about a certain vegetation type so that you can apply that cultural knowledge and respect that it needs. I think it's, from a non-Indigenous perspective, there's wonder and there's trust building that's in a stage of this revival that's allowing these practices to be embedded in our ecosystems.
In terms of you've been, is it safe to say that you've been not only for a very long time with the Firestick Alliance, but like you saw it grow just from for a very long board members since it was created. How, like, take us through that development actually in terms of that alliance, how it's how it grew. I would say.
So it grew from like-mindedness, but my journey began with when I was 19 years old, working with one of the uncles, Uncle Rod Mason, in the Snowy Mountains, who was one of only 5 Indigenous people that lived in the Ngarigo country, in the snowy parts of Australia, New South Wales. and he was trying really hard within national parks to get them to apply a cultural fire. But there was no policies and procedures to allow for that cultural fire to take place. Over the next couple of years, there was a transition where policies were created to allow for cultural burning within state government programs such as National Parks and Wildlife and other respective land holdings. So I saw that grow, and then applying cultural fire was that moment of knowing that this is something that I need to get behind and really understand myself. I went up to Cape York, which is in Queensland, New South Wales, Queensland, and I met with Victor Stephenson and Dr. Peter Stanley, who are now employed by the Firesticks Alliance to deliver the monitoring and the cultural values and the application of cultural fire for our organisation and support that revival within our local communities. I think Katie was mentioning before that it needs that Indigenous leadership, and that's what we help facilitate, is the local mobs being the leaders in the application of cultural fire within their area and restoring or reviving and allowing that practice to return to country. And the Firesticks Alliance itself was created in 2016, and it was on the back of a National Indigenous Fire Workshop that we were holding in Cape York, and the Firesticks Alliance was created to allow for bigger and more intimate ways of transferring cultural Indigenous knowledge and allowing workshops to happen at a regional, local and national level.
Jessica, also a question that comes into my mind as well is like beginning of the year, obviously the forest fires occurred. What was the response of Firesticks Alliance, and like how did the response I'm interested in, and in terms of and how did that relate to, was Indigenous knowledge, the use of Indigenous knowledge in that response?
It was the first time that we were really engaged to be on a platform that large, the bushfires. So that allowed us to have our voice. Last year during November, December, January, we were constantly being engaged to really talk about what cultural burning is, how it can be embedded into best practice and allowing Indigenous leadership. I think Victor Stephenson talks in his book Fire Country about having everyone on the bus rather than just having someone in the driver's seat and leaving other people behind. Everyone's the bus in that bus, and we're reapplying this cultural practice back in country based on vegetation types and law systems that have been embedded within our country here in Australia, all the way from the tip to the tail down in Tassie. Australia was formed on cultural fire, and that's the biggest message I think that people started to realise, was that Australia for thousands and thousands of years was that it was built up with fire in a cool, calm way. It wasn't feared, and people were experiencing a lot of fear during those bushfires last year, and this allowed for a lot of transition into that process of hope and understanding of these cultural practices.
Thank you so much for outlining that, because that's not what a lot of people watch the news, obviously, but they don't know like how the response of Indigenous peoples, and particularly the Firestick Alliance as well. For anything in terms of final thoughts, and I know there's a lot more that we could touch upon, but obviously Svetka only allows me 10 minutes in total. So anything that I forgot to ask you, or you really want to highlight or to talk about?
Yeah, I think just re-mentioning that the pathways to design for the revival of cultural practices, is allowing that from a local level, and having that support, practicing that knowledge in country. I know that there's a lot of mobs and Indigenous people around the world who have, from that colonization experience, not been allowed to practice their cultural ways of maintaining country for the ecosystems, for gathering, for food, for so many reasons, for that connection, and it's valued. I think that this transition that we're in to revival has allowed for those voices to be heard in a lot of ways, and for trust building, that's the platform for where Indigenous knowledge is going now. I think observing, I think I mentioned in the little survey that you sent through that observing, connection, understanding, silent knowing, and the progress of reciprocity to mob. I think it was also mentioned there by Katie and the last lady that was on. There's that sense of reciprocity that needs to happen for Indigenous knowledge, and just understanding what reciprocity can come in lots of different forms, and that knowledge is valued through reciprocity as well. Yeah, I think I'll probably finish on that and say happy birthday to you.
Thank you so much
for inviting me on here to talk about other projects.
No, thank you, and I apologize. I had actually, I'm looking at my notes right now that I really want to talk to you about pathways in design and reciprocity. So I apologize for not not coming to that towards that sooner, because in a something like reciprocity, it is very much talked about, but not really, in a way where it should be talked about, actually, when it comes to, especially when it comes to Indigenous knowledge. And I think there's a book, I can't remember the author, As We Have Always Done, and it talks about when it comes to Indigenous knowledge, respect, reciprocity, consent, empathy. All these things are so important when it comes to Indigenous knowledge and understanding Indigenous knowledge. If you want to understand Indigenous knowledge, you need to deploy reciprocity and empathy, consent, and respect. So thank you so much for so thank you so much. Let's talk at a different time, whereas we don't have to spend only 10 minutes, but more in depth about all this, because there's now 5, 10, 12 questions more that are coming up in my head. I apologize for that. So thank you so much for your time, Jessica, and really appreciate you for doing what you do, the work that you do, and being on the show, obviously. And hopefully you have a great day as well. Continuation of your day, and the view, it's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, it's quite beautiful here. I hope you heard some birds in the background too. There's some magical birds here.
Yeah, apart from the booing. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry.